Your book goes through Operation Blue Star all the way down to the reading down of Article 370, through shrapnel, conflict, blood, strife.
I could see the Delhi sky, getting smoky, and fires had started burning. I was home before my father reached, and I saw him enter the house, and he was shivering. My brother, who's now dead, had to run. He was being chased by a mob, again because he was wearing a turban. I learned another very important lesson, and it happened when I interviewed one of the terrorists inside the Golden Temple.
You describe very evocatively about how you were in Srinagar when the Babri Masjid is torn down on the 6th of December 1992 to investigate claims about damages to Kashmir temples, which was being cited as the reason for why the Babri Masjid pulling down was a kosher activity.
We were surrounded by Kashmiri Muslims, all of us saying, "You're here because you want to tell the rest of India that we are responsible for damage to the temple, but we will show you ourselves that there is in fact no damage." Nobody in Pakistan can pronounce the word Harinder. So I said, "This is Seema Baweja. I'm an Indian journalist. I work for Tehelka." So I said, I'm sorry. Can you Google Harinder Baweja?" He said, "You've started with a lie. How do I trust you? You're an Indian after all." At least my friends tell me that I don't look like, a typical Sardarni.
Oh, well, yes.
"तू हिंदू बनेगा न मुसलमान बनेगा, इंसान की औलाद है, इंसान बनेगा."
So 43 years after she started her career as a cub reporter, we have senior journalist Harinder Baweja in the studio today. Welcome to Book Shook and The Wire, and a very hot wire office. We've had an electricity breakdown, and thank you for suffering things pretty much close to the conflict that you've reported so assiduously. So Harinder, for those of you who know and for those of you who don't, is a sparkling, courageous journalist, reporter and author. She has reported on current affairs and has particularly been drawn to conflict points in India's recent political history and covered them over time, revisiting areas, consistently going back and keeping a track. She has won prestigious journalistic awards for her work, and her memoirs are her second solo book, the first being an acclaimed history of the Kargil War, A Soldier's Diary. Welcome to The Wire, Harinder.
Thank you so much.
So, Harinder, cutting straight to the chase because it's like a hot shoot, your book goes through Operation Blue Star all the way down to the reading down of Article 370, through shrapnel, conflict, blood, strife. At least in the introduction and the preface, you have woven together a story of hope, a story of being able to bridge through conflict and create an India, or to look towards the future, which is pretty much in contrast with the conflict. But, this is the time of films like Dhurandhar. This is the time of making macho films. We valorize war. What gives your point of view, your viewpoint?
There's nothing macho about violence and nothing macho about war. Nothing macho about saying "Ghar ghar mein ghus ke marenge," which has become the slogan that we hear the most. I started my journalism in a very different time, when we were actually able to hold a mirror to the ground, look at the roots for why violence begins. I became a part of a conflict zone for the first time, as you said, 43 years ago. I was part of the Punjab battlefield, chosen by my editor, perhaps for the wrong reasons. He felt I was a Fauji's daughter, and I was comfortable being around arms and ammunition. And he also perhaps went by my name, Harinder, and thought that sending a Sikh journalist would make a difference. Actually, I had the best of both worlds because I'm also Shami to friends and Harinder as my byline. So I had different sides talking to me very openly. I had the Hindus talking to me. At least my friends tell me that I don't look like, a typical Sardarni.
Oh, well, yes.
So when you say Harinder Baweja, or people expect to be meeting Harinder Baweja, they probably think that one very, burly Sardar is going to walk into the room and then they find this very diminutive woman. But I've been willing to take the risks and cover conflict. And Seema, um, like you said, we're in a hot shoot. The air conditioning is not working, so I feel like I'm sitting in one of my conflict
Great. So
zones.
you're in your element. So I want to like take you back. You yourself mentioned you're Fauji's daughter. Your father was a proud Air Force officer, and you describe very evocatively, with a lot of emotion, but with a lot of clarity, about how you went through reporting on 1984, Operation Blue Star, and then the violence inflicted on the Sikhs. And your father wears a helmet to conceal the fact that he was a Sardar. And you are, of course, a woman with a Sikh name. So tell me about that clarity which you write about, for those who have not read the book, about how it emotionally affected you, but not in a religious way. I mean, can you just draw that out?
So I grew up in Air Force cantonments. You know, the word secular has become a bad word. But as far as I'm concerned, secularism is a lived reality. You know, I grew up and we had temples, mosques, churches and gurdwaras side by side. And I saw people, you know, praying to different gods, whoever they believed in. I believed always in humanity. I don't disrespect those who are faithful, but I believe in respecting all faiths, and therefore I say that I believe in humanity. And violence teaches you uh, a very, I mean, what should I say? It teaches you how politics and religion can fuel violence. So that, you know, for me was another reason to step back and understand that, like what Mrs. Gandhi did with Bhindra Wale, for example, uh, not letting him run free even after he was arrested. Uh, I've met families of Hindu passengers who were pulled out of buses, but to come back to 1984, I was actually a very young reporter then, and we lived in Delhi. At that time, my father was posted. He was a serving Air Force officer, and he, on the 31st October 1984, when Mrs. Gandhi was shot dead, she was the serving Prime Minister. She paid for her life because she signed off on Operation Blue Star, and that really, you know, entering the precincts of the most sacred religious place for the Sikh community was a deep wound, and so deep that you even see its ramifications today. Maybe not in Punjab, with the slogan for Khalistan, we know what's happening in Canada and America on that front. So my father was driving from his office in South Block back to Saket, where we lived then, one of the many colonies in Delhi. And he had to pass the All India Institute of Medical Sciences, where Indira Gandhi's body was lying. And I remember my office used to be very close to the wire office. I could see the Delhi sky, you know, getting smoky, and fires had started burning. I was home before my father reached, and I saw him enter the house, and he was shivering. Uh, so I asked him what happened, and you mentioned that he had to take off his turban. I think that day, more than the physical act of taking off his turban, it was like a part of his identity had been attacked and killed. He was a very proud Sikh, you know, and I understood that day the importance uh, of what a community was feeling because the Golden Temple had been pulverized. Not the Sanctum Sanctorum itself, I'm talking about the Golden Temple complex. And I was allowed into the Golden Temple a few days later. But let me complete the 84 riot story, the carnage. I used to padlock the house with my father locked inside, my mother locked inside, uh, my brother, who's now dead, had to run. He was being chased by a mob, again because he was wearing a turban. And it was the 31st of October, a cold coldish winter night, and he hid in a water tank. So when he reached home, he was wet and frightened. And I realized that day that I was lucky, in fact, that two members of my family had survived, unlike thousands others who had been brutally killed. So I locked my parents and everybody else, put a padlock on my house, and I went out reporting. Now, what was my armor? My armor was that I could not be identified as a Sikh, you know. So that was the starting of my journey through conflict. I just then got sucked into the lives of people with wounds. I got sucked into various conflict zones where people live wretched lives because, you know, you can't step out of your house without having to pass 100 bunkers and show your ID card. You're a suspect. Um, so I learned another very important lesson, and it happened when I interviewed one of the terrorists inside the Golden Temple. This is before the next operation, which was Operation Black Thunder. So I was sitting on the floor facing Jagir Singh. He's part of my book. I'm not going to reveal too much because I want people to pick up the book and read it. But I asked him a question which I regret. That's why I'm talking about it. So I asked him, I said, the level of violence is down for a few days. And he fell silent, and I'm waiting for his reply. And then when he opens his mouth, it's my turn to have the shivers. Because he looks at me and he says, you don't have to eat 2 chapatis every day. Some days you feel more hungry, and some days you feel less hungry. And I realized that I was walking up the wrong path. Violence and conflict is not about the number of people killed. It's about the sociology and psychology.
Fear.
Yeah, you know, so then I changed tack as a reporter. We all make mistakes. I think, you know, if you ask me to list a mistake, I would say I asked the wrong question that day.
I think you're being harsh on yourself, but yeah, I can understand why you think it was.
Yeah.
And you, I'll give the bit of the game away that there was an incident later, shortly, about
When I
a
was
lot of
sitting with
deaths.
Satpal
Yeah,
Gang.
yeah. Moving from Punjab to the other area that you've covered, and you describe very evocatively about how you were in Srinagar when the Babri Masjid is torn down on the 6th of December 1992. And you want to somehow enter into that conflict as well and kind of report on it. And you decide to go back with another lady photographer and a reporter. The two of you decide to go back to investigate claims about damages to Kashmir temples, which was being cited as the reason for why the Babri Masjid pulling down was a kosher activity. So tell us a bit about that. You know, you found that 52 temples were damaged, but after the Babri mosque had been pulled down. So describe to us about how you took shelter inside a temple while you were trying to investigate that story.
So that was a very difficult assignment, and actually it was my editor-in-chief Arun Puri's idea. So soon after the Babri Masjid was demolished, and once again we saw how violence took over, and once again the Ayodhya sky was filling up with smoke because riots started straight after the demolition. And you know, when you saw the domes being literally pulled down one after the other, and one of the first things that L.K. Advani said, and he was leading the Rath Yatra, and he lost control of the mob, which often happens, you know. It happened with Bhindranwale. Mrs. Gandhi let the genie out of the bottle and could never put it back. I think 1992 is when another fault line started, the Hindu-Muslim fault line, which is continuing till today, but we'll come to that later. So one of the first things that Advani said, and he said two things. One, he said it was one of the saddest days of my life, but then he got into this mode of, but what about the 40 temples in Kashmir? So they were like trying to justify the pulling down of the Babri Masjid by pointing to the fact, according to them, fact in quotes, that 40 temples had been desecrated and pulled down in the valley. So I was asked by my editor to go to the BJP, get the list from them because it's their claim, yeah, that 40 temples have been damaged. So I went with a woman photographer, Shipra Das, in the month of January, bitterly cold. We were slithering through snow, uh, with the list in our hand. And interestingly, we got a different set of lists from different people. So the BJP headquarter had a list of 40 odd. The Jammu BJP office had 80 odd. Uh, so it was very important to call out the lie. And the only way of doing it was actually going there and physically examining each temple. So we reached there and we are suspects because by then the Kashmiri Pandits had migrated. And that's another awful wound uh, which we need to talk about because, I cannot even imagine the pain of having to lose home and never being able to go back ever. So back to the Babri Masjid stories. At every stop that we made at a temple, we were surrounded by Kashmiri Muslims. All of us saying, "You're here because uh, you want to tell the rest of India that we are responsible for damage to the temple, but we will show you ourselves that there is, in fact, no damage." By then, the temples were being guarded by, at that time, the Border Security Force, and we had an incident which I've described in the book, where the Kashmiri Muslims said, "Okay, we'll escort you in, only two of us, and show you ourselves that there is no damage." The BSF said, "Sorry." Now, the BSF is also working in a hostile environment. They don't trust the Muslims. The Kashmiri Muslims don't trust men in uniform. So there's the level of mistrust is another element of conflict. Um, so in a second, we had bullets flying over our heads. And before I knew it, Shipra and I were dragged into that temple and we were crawling in on all fours. So just lucky. Sometimes when you take the risk, and I was asked whether I'm a danger junkie. I think I am. But maybe I'm also a cat with 9 lives.
Yes. Maybe you're the lucky charm. So, yeah.
So it's interesting that you asked this question because I remember the pujari of that temple coming to talk to us. And he said, "मैं आपसे झूठ नहीं बोलूँगा. I offer prayers in this temple every day. Gita ki kasam." A lot of the pujaris told me that temples may have been hit in crossfire situations, but there was no vengeful attack on temples prior to 1992. In 86, Kashmir did see riots and temples were damaged at that time, but they had been repaired by the Kashmiri Pandits and the Muslims together, which I've written in the book. So let's not demonize the Kashmiri Pandits also. And the temples that had been repaired, interestingly, were on the list of the
those
BJP.
that were damaged.
Yeah. So it was important because it was a diabolical lie. It was important to demolish the myth that L.K. Advani was trying to propagate by saying, "What about the temples of Kashmir?"
So another very fine example of why reportage on the ground matters so much, even in risky scenarios that you undertook, were your journeys into Pakistan. And you go there to Murid Ke and you visit the Jamaat-ud Dawa's supposed hospitals, which have clean sheets, 60 beds, and not a single patient. And it's very clear who's calling the shots there. So how did you reconcile, being there, wanting to kind of go in, report, and yet having to tell the truth? I mean, how do you go back then? And you've been there a couple of times.
So I went to Murid Ke, known worldwide as the headquarters of the Lashkar-e-Taiba, twice. And very interesting because you cannot enter that complex. It's not a charitable organization. That is what they like to portray. It is guarded by gun-wielding men, and they only recognize the faces of the Lashkar-e-Taiba. And my minder, an escort, who took me there both times, was Hafiz Saeed's son-in-law. Now, Hafiz Saeed is the founder of the Lashkar-e-Taiba. I went for the first time 10 days after 26/11, 10 days after Ajmal Kasab had been caught alive in Mumbai, and 10 days after the most audacious attack on Indian soil, which lasted 3 days, before the NSG could clear the iconic Taj Hotel and the Oberoi Hotel and Nariman House, amongst other targets. So I woke up one morning to a message from my editor. I was with Tehelka then. Tarun Teshpal was my boss. And I wake up, I'm rubbing my eyes, and I see this message, and it says, apply for a visa to Pakistan. And I'm sort of half awake, and I'm like, this guy has lost it. Which, I mean, why would Pakistan allow an Indian journalist to sniff around on its soil 10 days after Ajmal Kasab has been caught? He started talking, and by then I was like talking to my sources in the IB and the Mumbai police and the RNAW, because they were the ones interrogating him. And the word Muridke came up several times in his interrogation. So in my head, I was very clear that, okay, I'm lucky I've got a visa. Tarun said, what is the story that you would like to do? So I was very quick in replying because I had figured it out by then. I said, there is only one story, and that is to breach those gates and get into the headquarters of the Lashkar-e-Taiba. So I said, but it's risky. What if I'm kidnapped, etc. And Tarun, in his very, Tarun style, said, oh, then we'll have an even bigger story.
Good God. Yeah.
So anyway, off I go and land in Lahore. So all terror organizations also live on publicity. Propaganda is their oxygen, right? And they're happy to give interviews, but they were not taking my calls. They had a communication chief, Abdullah Muntazir, who I've quoted in the book. He just refused. I tried before I boarded for Lahore from my India number, no response. I landed in Pakistan. He didn't pick up calls, maybe because it was an unknown number. Once he picked up, and I quickly introduced myself. And I have to say, it may sound like a lie, and it did sound like a lie to him, but nobody in Pakistan can pronounce the word Harinder. So I said, this is Seema Baweja. I'm an Indian journalist. I work for Tehelka. Everybody had heard of Tehelka. Unknown to me, he was Googling Seema Baweja. So he said, there is nobody called Seema Baweja. So I said, I'm sorry, can you Google Harinder Baweja? He said, you've started with a lie. How do I trust you? You're an Indian after all.
Oh, Lord.
Okay? So I'm used to being taunted by separatists, including by Yasin Malik, and maybe you'll ask me a question on that. So I'd hit a wall. How do I breach those gates? So I was invited for lunch by a minister. I've not named him in the book, and I don't plan to name him because you're a journalist and a credible one. We protect our sources, right? So even as we were eating lunch, he made a phone call, and the same guy who said, I can't trust you because you're an Indian and you've already lied, was waiting in the anteroom.
Oh.
So this minister had called him, and he told me, I owe the Lashkar one, because when they get arrested, we get phone calls saying, can you help them be released before an FIR is lodged against them? So to me, my journey into Lashkar had already begun over lunch, because the linkages between the state and the non-state actors, were so evident. I mean, even as I was eating the most delicious kebabs in the biryani, my head was like absorbing, facts like, okay, this is how closely the power structure is linked to the people, to the armies that they've created and armed. So the Lashkar had no choice but to take me, because, they were
being told to do that by...
They were being told to do that by somebody...
Command.
Yeah, who they would need in the future. So then I discussed logistics, etc. And soon my car was following this huge cavalcade And Lahore to Muridke is about 40-50 minutes. It's on the outskirts of Lahore. And the gates were shut. I saw everything for myself. The second time I went for a television news channel. So we've actually even got it on videotape. And the second trip I mentioned in the book for another interesting reason, because by then the international pressure on Pakistan was building up, and the Pakistani government declared that they have nothing to do with that headquarter. They've actually appointed a caretaker, and Lashkar has nothing to do with that headquarter anymore. So, but that gate didn't open. The caretaker was inside, but the gate only opened when Hafiz Said's son-in-law
Personally, yeah, had to turn up.
them.
Yeah.
So then they put their guns down and opened the gates, and I was back in the Lashkar headquarters for a second time.
Yeah, so I think that's the key thing is the second time, and we urge people to read the book to figure out the first time, the second time. Plenty has happened, and it's pretty much on. We are told that Operation Sindoor hasn't ended, and now there are these targets which are being attacked, and Muridke is on them, etc. What do you think of the way the... Go on.
To add to the previous answer, Muridke was attacked during the course of Operation Sindoor, and we were shown visible evidence. And from the photographs that I've seen, I could recognize parts of the complex because I had visited it. But now there are reports that it's also being reconstructed. So, I called the son-in-law after Operation Sindoor. I thought it would be interesting to have a conversation with him to find out the extent of the damage. And I got a recorded message saying the number you're trying to reach is powered off. But I think the more important question is, and we've had 3 surgical strikes. There's something now called a Modi doctrine, which believes in hitting Pakistan and hitting it hard. Governments are free to choose what they want to do. We've done that with Pakistan. We haven't necessarily done the same with China, for example, but that's
another story.
But
But your answer is my question, that does that work? You look back many years on, is that working?
So, Seema, the India-Pakistan relationship is in the deep freeze, right? There was a time when there were back-channel talks. In his post-retirement press conference, or just as he was retiring, Dr. Manmohan Singh said that he was very close to a deal with General Musharraf. Prime Minister Vajpayee tried, and actually that was surprising because he invited General Musharraf, the architect of Kargil, the villain of Kargil as he's often called, to Agra for a summit. So I don't see Mr. Modi doing any of that. I don't see Mr. Modi becoming a Vajpayee or a Dr. Manmohan Singh. I think his strategy is quite clear, and he said as much and reiterated that blood and water cannot flow together, and we will not distinguish between state actors and non-state actors. Honestly, I've been to Pakistan. I've felt the love of the people on the streets. I make a distinction between the deep state, which exists, and the common Pakistani. But I don't think the present government does. And they've also whipped large parts of the Indian population into being very jingoistic and buying into their muscular nationalism policy. So if you're asking me whether India and Pakistan might be talking in the near future, my answer is no.
And is this fixing the problem, this kind of...
Obviously not. I think you need to talk.
Yeah. So, there's this whole spectrum. There's also Yasin Malik in your book, some very interesting, I don't know how much you want to dwell on it now or just urge people to read it for themselves. But from 84 to now, if I was to ask you, and you do that in your epilogue, and you've done that in the introduction as well, how has the Indian state, which has been a critical player in all these conflicts that you've essayed here, how has that kind of changed from then to now? 4 decades is a long time. We've seen several flavors of government, several types. How would you see the change now as somebody who's still reporting or making your cause? There's this very fine interview with Omar Abdullah post the reading down of Article 370. So what are the changes you see, Shami?
So I don't see an effort being made to walk the road to peace. And I think walking the road to peace is very critical. And it has become more critical after what we saw in Pahalgam. We're talking 2025. On the 22nd of April, heavily armed terrorists literally walked out of the woods. Uh, there was not a policeman in sight. It's a 1 hour trek from the road to the Baisaran meadow. Omar Abdullah had to see 26 tourists sort of had to return their bodies in coffins. It was a reminder of the fact that we continue to live in conflicted times. And Seema, I have covered Kashmir since Rubaiya's kidnapping in 1989, and she was the daughter then of the serving Union Home Minister, Mufti Mohammad Saeed. I've seen various peace efforts, right? I've seen several interlocutors being appointed. Even Narendra Modi appointed an interlocutor, a former Director General of the Intelligence Bureau, Dineshwar Sharma. But he wasn't really given the power to engage, and I've interacted with him both as the DIB and as the interlocutor. I think he understood Kashmir pretty well, and he was keen to walk that path to peace. So I was talking about being a Kashmir watcher since 1989, and so many promises made, so many promises broken. When I look back at Kashmir, I see so much debris. We have not tried to pick up the pieces and try and consider the fact that the people who inhabit what we call the crown on India's head. We keep talking about, uh, Kashmir being the crown on India's head, but I'm afraid we've just looked at Kashmir as a piece of real estate. I have not seen, Umar Abdullah said at my launch, people want to be one. Give them dignity, give them justice. So many fake encounters, not one man punished, not one. And the thing that I never thought I would see ever in Kashmir was the Kashmiris pouring out of their homes and walking the streets of Srinagar, holding the national flag after the Pahalgam attack. That was such a fine window of opportunity. That was a time to reach out. After COVID, Prime Minister Modi had an all-party meeting with all the parties from Jammu and Kashmir and promised Dil or Delhi. I mean, he said we've had a duri, we've had distance between Delhi and Srinagar, and we need to bridge that. Now, here are people walking the streets of Srinagar saying we condemn terrorism. They opened their houses, their mosques, their mohallas, their hotels, everything. People were driving tourists, panicked tourists. We had such a brilliant window of opportunity. People had poured out of their homes and they were holding the national flag. I never thought I would see that. And what was this response of the Indian government? We saw houses of Kashmiris who they said were militants, in the past. A militant 10 years ago, 15 years ago, their houses being strapped with explosives and blown up. I interviewed the Mirwais, who's a very important stakeholder in Kashmir. And he said to me something that has really set me thinking, also gave me a lot of pain and hurt. And in the course of the interview, he said, I'm only trying to pursue peace. I'm not an anti-national. Please talk to me. And he says, people who, ask him, and it's a very interesting question that they ask him, why is New Delhi scared of our namaz? Why does New Delhi fear our prayers? Because every Friday, on most Fridays, he's not even allowed to step out of his house to go and sit on the pulpit of the Jama Masjid, which he's supposed to do. He's the Mirwais of, of Kashmir. But the problem that I've seen, if I connect 40 years, is that every prime minister has tried in his own style. Uh, Vajpayee had the guts. He even sent the Union Home Secretary to have talks with the Hizbul Mujahideen, gun-wielding members of the Hizbul
There's a
Mujahideen,
photograph as well of,
and they came to those talks,
with
with
masks.
blindfolds and masks. So you had that attempt, and now you have, people not knowing whether they can get passports, people fearing that if they tweet, they'll be arrested, if journalists fearing that if they write a story, they'll be called to the police station and be arrested. I mean, Kashmir has changed, according to me, for the worse. It's become a police state. Um, it's a place that's choked. It's suffocating. It needs a political outreach. What happened on August 5, 2019, when the valley was cut cold and 370 was killed, there's a sullen silence, and there's a need for a political outreach. But ideology, I think, the RSS has never made bones about the fact that 370 must go, and go it did. It had been diluted over the years, as we know, but it was a fig leaf that still gave the people of Jammu and Kashmir some dignity. Right now, I don't see any effort being made to walk the road to peace.
No, that's like really comprehensive, and I want to close this session on this very fine book by stretching that, because I meant not just Kashmir in terms of handling other conflicts, in terms of other fault lines, and pluralism can be seen as as a bunch of fault lines, or it could be seen as a bunch of bridges. So has the Indian state kind of been able to be the magnanimous Indian state that a plural, multicultural, vibrant, new India deserves and needs?
I'm going to be called anti-national and seditious for what I'm going to say now, but it's very difficult for me to recognize the India that I live in. I have very close Muslim friends, and they've done fantastic work, and I've spoken to one of them, but I have not revealed the name of that person. His father stayed back in 1947, believing in India. And my friend asked his father one day that how come we didn't go, because half the family is on the other side. And his father said, religion does not define identity. But in New India, I'm sorry, religion defines not just identity. Religion has come to define politics. It is the new fault line. And when I hear chief ministers who've, sworn by the constitution talk about, let's say, Diwali comes only once a year, namaz is offered 52 times in a year, I feel like I'm going to lose my sanity. When I hear the Assam chief minister speak, again I feel like, why are we, deliberately poking and stoking this fault line? I saw it, what damage it did after the Babri Masjid was demolished. And but the mantra these days is, the more you divide, the longer you rule. So, and covering conflict leaves many scars. So when I feel like I need to protect myself, because then all the memories of the violence come back, I turn to Mohammad Rafi. And if you allow,
Do you
I'll
want to
read.
please end with that?
I
Yes.
want to end with that. So I'll just take a minute or two. Since you asked me a question about New India, it is difficult sometimes to read reports about how communities are deliberately provoked, how mere hearsay can lead to detentions and arrests, and how policemen paid to uphold the law have become paid masters of their political bosses. When I hear comments like Holi comes once a year, namaz 52 times, I tune out and then tune in to a voice I worshipped since my childhood. I'm talking about Mohammad Rafi. And then I quote, Rafi's lilting voice is soulful, and the lyrics of one of the songs, Tu Hindu banega na Musalman banega. इंसान की औलाद है इंसान बनेगा. And it's ironic because this is from a movie, Dhool Ka Phool, made in 1959. We're in 2025. 1959 was one India. 2025 is a different India. I wish we would, all listen to this song and imbibe the words, because in this movie is about a Muslim father bringing up a Hindu child. And that's really the note I'd like to end on, because I feel that's the only chord that will take us forward.
Thank you so much. Needless to add anything else other than thank you, and thank you for suffering a hot interview.
My pleasure entirely. It's a pleasure to talk to The Wire, because there are very few people still doing journalism. I get called fearless, but actually there was a time when journalism was fearless, and now it's being practiced by very few, and The Wire is amongst one of them.
Thank you so much. Coming from you, that means a lot. Thank you very much, and thank you for watching.